Tim, I'm brought up to speed now on revenue operations. I'm like, I have an appetite for so much more. So I figured I'd reach out to you. Maybe you could help me understand, like, once I grasp the concept of revenue operations, where do I inject it in my business? And depending on my business, does it get injected? Talk to me. How does that work?
Great. Yeah, great question. I mean, let's be honest. You're not going to throw in revenue operations until you actually got some revenue in the business, right? So it generally happens later in the corporate life cycle, right? So, you got to get anchored on the product and the product roadmap. That's the first problem you typically have to solve, right? And product market fit before you're even thinking about revenue operations and the buyer journey. So there's the father of the corporate life cycle, Renick. His name is Ichak Adisis.
Bless you, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I mean, he's written extensively on the corporate life cycle. I think he's got like 10 stages of the corporate life cycle. And we try to simplify things around here at Growth Sigma. I mean, we kind of bring it down to 4. And because we're thinking about what are the stages one needs to go through really to get the product defined and get a clear vision on that.
Right.
Go out and get your first stages of growth and then ultimately scale the business and become a market leader. So we look at it a little bit more simplistically, and I'm not putting his model down. Who am I to question the father of the corporate life cycle? But we try to simplify it a little bit.
Well, I don't want to hear about anybody's Isaac so-and-so. So can you, what is the 4th stage of corporate life cycle according to Growth Sigma?
Well, we look at it as number one, and if it's helpful, we can go into these. Number one is envision. So getting a clear vision for what's the product in the addressable market. Number 2, we call opportunistic. So, getting out there kind of like the grand opening, right? Think about a soft opening in a restaurant. The grand opening is exposing yourself to the market.
Right.
The 3rd is optimize. And then the 4th is synchronize. So those are the 4 stages as we look at it.
You say synchronize?
Synchronize.
Got it. Okay. I'm with you. And so the vision stage consists of what? And from start to finish, what does that kind of look like?
Well, and I think we can all relate to this. We all have people who've gone out and started their own business, right? Who are entrepreneurs. So the vision stage is just that. It's a time where people call it product market fit. You have a visionary entrepreneur or founder who comes up with a dream to change the world, right? As we all do, right? We all think we can change the world.
Babe, we got to put it in the form of, we got to mortgage the house.
Probably not yet. But what the idea is, is you're trying to put it into an MVP, like a minimally viable product that you could take to the market and get some feedback on.
Got it.
Right?
Yep. Makes sense.
So, but you're doing this. I call this this is in the controlled lab, right? So you're not really opening it up to the world. In fact, I was just on a call the other day from a gentleman who was showing me his software in the RevOps space, and he called it stealth mode. We're still in stealth mode. And he's like showcasing it to a select number of folks to get their feedback and to make changes, make adjustments, make tweaks in the product before, it gets into prime time. So it's an incredibly inspiring time for the business. The founder has a lot of great ideas. They're networking with other people, generally relatively controlled. And maybe at the tail end, they're going out and they're looking for a little bit of capital because they want to launch this, right? And so they got to put some sales and marketing engines and strengths behind this. Yep. So they'll go out, depending on how ambitious they are, whether it's friends and family money, VC money. And that's when really the equation changes, right? The risk reward dynamic really shifts is when you got money behind it, because that's when there's expectations for what are my returns going to look like?
Yeah. Nobody likes to invest and lose their money. So especially when it's other people's money and that they're going to be asking questions about when is this going to market? How many you got? Like that kind of thing. So
but now we're kind of entering into this new stage, right? Of opportunistic, which, I equate this to, we're coming out of the lab. Again, going back to the example with the restaurant, we had our soft opening, right? Where we tried some things out. People came into the restaurant, stressed the operation a little bit because we saw some things we couldn't manage. But now we're going out to the market, right? We're taking our investments, we're investing. Perhaps the founder who was previously chief cook and bottle washer. He or she was doing all the sales, right? And you think about a founder, right? Is the one thing they believe in is the product. They're very passionate about the product. And sometimes that passion can sell, right?
Yeah,
so
no
they
doubt
go
about it.
out for the first time and they go out looking for a sales leader because they got a lot of levers to pull. They got an ongoing concern to manage. So they're going out to look for a sales leader who can spend 100% of their time going out trying to get early stage growth. Let's try to go out and get our first 5, 6 big clients.
Right.
Now, if you've ever, it's really interesting because, I've worked for founders. I've talked to other people who've worked for founders. It's an interesting dynamic, right? Because it's almost like it can be a no-win situation because the founder doesn't know a ton about sales. They're passionate about their product and how they want to change the world. And oftentimes that sells. And so it's difficult to kind of meet their expectations early on, right? So they think that the whole world should want their product.
Exactly.
Everybody should want their product. So there's this little bit of a stress, I think, initially between the sales leader and the founder, and that puts more pressure on getting out there to sell more and more.
Right.
And what that pressure typically results in is some creativity. So we had some use cases for our product. When we were in the lab, we knew exactly how it was going to be used. But then the customer comes to us and says, you know what? I want your knife set, but I actually don't want to use it in the kitchen. I want to use it out on the fishing docks.
Right.
And so now we have a question that we need to answer as an organization. Do we want to tailor the product to meet their specific use case? And in the early stages of a company, there's enough pressure specifically on revenue to provide some returns back to the investors that you tend to provide some relatively creative deal structures, right?
Well, I would imagine you got to, you know what I mean? Like, if you're, what are you going to say? No. I mean, like, you need the revenue. So you got to think out of the box and, you got to cater to these people if you want your business to actually grow and be viable, to your point. So it makes perfect sense. Thus the opportunistic, right?
Right. So for one client, you may have a new exceptions process that's only related to that specific client. For another client, you may have to do an API integration, right? Because they have a certain unique requirement on that. For another one, you may need to put in a dedicated operations team, whatever it might be, right? So it's like every single time you make a sale, the sale's slightly different or sometimes wildly different.
It's not anything that you plan.
No.
You're redoing the process all over again.
If you think about it, these early customers wield a lot of power over the initial direction of the product and the company and the infrastructure of the company.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
So it's at this stage, right, where, remember, we're still riding on a high. We got some raving fans who are customers. We're out having great happy hours. Right. You start to see maybe 1 or 2 red lights go off in the control room. Right.
Right.
And we're trying to hold all of this together with bubble gum and shoestring. Right.
Right.
And so people start to complain to the founder, like, wow, costs are a little out of control here. Right. I mean, and by the way, the CFO then walks in and says, I thought we were making more on these deals than we actually are. But when we run the economics of these, it costs a lot to service these customers, right? Then the COO walks in and says, I can't hold this infrastructure together much longer. We sell one more client and this house of cards is falling down.
I'm working 190 hours a week just to service these 5 clients that we have because they're all different.
Yeah. So more over time, more and more red lights start going off. And then eventually there's an oh crap moment, which is, and I've talked to sales leaders who've experienced this, right? Which is they're told, Renick, they can't sell one more deal because the house of cards is so fragile, right? If they sell one more deal, the whole thing's coming down. They just simply can't maintain the infrastructure and be able to service the clients that they have.
Sure.
So that's when it gets really challenging because what you have is you sold deals not at a great profit. So your free cash flow is not that great. Right. And you got a very expensive infrastructure that needs a complete rebuild.
Right.
So how do you pull those puzzle pieces together? Gets rather challenging. And that's when the company has some decisions to make, which is generally we need to go back out to the market and see if we can get an investor to put an infusion of cash back in the business.
At the end of this opportunistic stage, I would imagine everybody is simply panicked, right? Like, what we need to do something. We need to do something different, and we need to get organized. We need to get structured, right? And boom, I would imagine you're into your next step, right? Like, how does that stage work into the four, and at what time do you know you're in that third stage?
Yeah, the status quo becomes unmanageable, right? And here's the interesting thing: we've all worked in companies like you're putting in 16 hours a day,
Easy,
and tons of effort, but very little progress. You start looking around for problem solvers, project managers, people who fix problems. If you ever saw Pulp Fiction,
Ooh.
Harvey Keitel knocks at the door and he introduces himself as Mr. Wolf.
Mr. Wolf.
And I'm a problem solver. These
Has
are the types of
anybody
people
not
that the
seen Pulp
founder's
Fiction?
looking for. What's that?
Hasn't everybody seen Pulp Fiction?
We may be dating ourselves a little bit. I mean, the movie came out, I think, in the early 90s. So I don't think
greatest
everyone's
movies
seen it.
ever.
Maybe everyone in our generation has seen it.
Like, remember he hits him with the trank dart? I would imagine what the CEO is on the table, waiting for private equity to hit him. And anyway, I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent. Keep going.
No, but that's basically what it feels like, right?
Right.
I mean, you're just working really hard. You're not really getting anywhere. And so then you start to see these new terms get introduced within the organization around the water cooler. Things like process, controls,
right.
We need a playbook, right? No one had ever heard those terms before generally, right? It was all about go sell as many clients as you can. Sales had all the power. But now you start to see the power start to shift a little bit because the only way we're going to grow is to rebuild the infrastructure, make some significant changes, right? So we can grow and we can get released out. So that's when we enter this third stage we call optimization. And optimization is all about cleaning up the mess that got us to this point. And the reality is sometimes we needed to create that mess or else we never would have even got here.
Not only is it exhilarating, but it's probably also like super terrifying too, right? Like, as a founder, if you're telling me that I don't have control of what I just spent the last 5 years building, I'm going to be worried, right? And especially if you have private investors or venture capital people who are saying, listen, I'm majority owner here. I'm going to have a say in what goes on. Something tells me that those boardroom conversations might get a little frisky.
Yeah, that is true. Well, it's actually a good lead in into what generally happens in optimization, because again, we got this issue where we're not creating a lot of cash flow because the customer margins are relatively low, and we got to put some significant investment back into the business to improve the operating infrastructure. So it's oftentimes at this point where we go back out to the market, and generally you see private equity get involved here. The one thing that private equity loves is I got a proven business model and I got generally low profitability. Right. Because that's a problem they've solved over and over and over again. So they can inject some capital in the business, take a majority control, own the board seats, and basically bring in the right expertise, right, to solve some of these big, hairy problems. So the private equity firm comes in, and oftentimes, by the way, they will bring in new leaders, right? Generally, they can bring in a new CEO, CFO, chief sales officer. Generally, that's the playbook, right? And so the founder gets a little bit sidelined, is trying to find their identity. And what you have is this huge clash between what I call the old guard and the new guard, right? So the old guard, who went through battle together, it's like Braveheart, right? Just to get here.
I'll meet you in the middle.
I mean, it was quite the struggle to get here, and they put in all the effort, right, in the hours. And then you got the new guard coming in with their finely pressed suits, right? Who think they have all the answers. Well, you can imagine how much collaboration goes on between these two groups.
Something's telling me that it'd probably be a little confrontational.
Despite the namesake, optimization, right? It's still a period of chaos here during this period.
Right.
And in the midst of all this, though, I would say there's a lot of good work taking place, but a lot of the optimization that's taking place is what I call local, right? So when the new CEO comes, they see they have a number of local messes. So someone's got to clean up in sales. So they bring in someone to do sales operations. Someone's got to clean up this mess in marketing. There's so much work to do that each of these functions unto themselves is a huge project. Someone's got to clean up the technology and rationalize all these IT systems, right? So the first step in optimization is, how do I improve within these respective departments, right?
Right.
And so no one at this point, though, is taking an outside-in view of how do all the departments interact on behalf of the customer. You remember how we talked about at the tail end of the last stage, you start to see these cracks in the infrastructure.
Right.
And that was the clue that, okay, we got to go shore everything up. Now we see a different set of cracks. And so what happens is when you start focusing inward on the organization and start cleaning up the operations, okay, inevitably that means you're bringing your focus away from who? The customer.
Right.
Right. And while you're focusing inward on the organization, especially trying to fix your margin problem, what is one way to fix your margin problem? Raise prices.
Right.
So, and this is a common tactic, right? So in the midst of looking inward, not focusing your attention on your customer, now you're going out to your customer and asking for a price increase, right? It's like the double whammy.
Right.
And so it could be that. I mean, you could piss off a couple of big customers doing that. You may see some of your net promoter scores go down, your customer set. You could lose a big customer, but those same lights now start to go back off in the control room, but for a different reason.
Right.
And so for the first time, you now start to hear different words around the water cooler, things like outside in, customer first, customer experience, buyer experience. And then there's this whole shift, which ultimately catapults you into the last phase, which we call synchronization.
Right.
So that's kind of where you take a lot of the optimization and a lot of the great work that you've done, and you try to harmonize all of that from the advantage or the benefit of the customer from the outside in.
All right. So we've just gone through the process of fixing our sales silo, right? We brought in the ninja who's going to fix sales. We brought in the samurai who's going to fix marketing. We brought in the other ninja for customer service, right? And they're all working in their own little worlds, and they're making it happen. Are you telling me now that the next stage, we're going to take each one of those silos and we're going to say, hey guys, we're going to be thinking about this in a completely different way now. So get out of your silos. Let's think holistically about our customer. And now this is how we have to do things. Who does that, by the way?
So now we finally got around to the question you asked at the outset, which is, hey, when does revenue operations really take form within these organizations?
At this stage?
This is the ultimate longest answer ever, I think. We just set the world record.
Wow. I actually forgot my question. I'm glad you brought it back because I was already lost in the details.
So here we got, we got a sales function that's operating pretty well now. Again, locally, we got marketing that's doing some things well. We got customer success that's doing some well, but they're all kind of optimizing based on their own interactions with the customer, right?
Right.
And what they don't realize, or what people start to smarten up to, is, you got emails that are being sent to the customer, which are disconnected from sales presentations. Finance is sending invoices. Operations is sending product tickets. So still from the customer's vantage point, things are still very chaotic, and it's just not a very seamless experience.
Sure.
So revenue operations comes in, and their goal is, how do I take these locally optimized functions now and like they're working like gears now together, right? So now I'm tethering these together. I'm connecting these together to best serve that customer at every single stage of the buyer journey, all the way from, awareness where I never even heard of your company. So how do we get in front of them and at least get some name recognition through the education, through consideration, through close, and ultimately into the expansion of our particular relationship through our partnership, our deepened partnership. So that's the purview of revenue operations, is how do I take each stage of that buyer journey and start to harness all of the collective assets of the organization. So based on where the buyer is, what skills do I need? What capabilities do I need to bring into that conversation? What messaging and sales content can help progress them to the next stage, right? What is the business process and practices and playbooks that I need to bring that we've learned and codified through all of our experience of the plays we should be running, right? What's the technology that I should be employing to automate that workflow and make it more efficient, right? So in each of those areas of the buyer journey, I got to line up that stack, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people talk about it as if it's just the tech stack, but it's a lot more than the tech stack.
So I think it's also important to mention that, you get to this last stage, right? And, you've worked so hard to get on top of this mountain. And, I would imagine that by the time you're up on this mountain, there's not a lot of competition around. Or if there is, they're on their own mountain 100 miles away and doing their own thing. But it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the term, synergy, right? Or you still have to recreate what you're doing. So even though you've gone through all four stages, even at the last stage, you're not at a finish line, right? You're doing it again, more so after you've hit the top of the mountain. Am I right?
I mean, getting to the top of the mountain is an incredible feat, but staying at the top of the mountain is probably even more challenging.
Right.
Hey, you remember when we were growing? I grew up in the Northeast, right? We would climb up onto these snowbanks, right?
Yes, I know where you're going.
And we would have kids coming charging at you. I mean, they make Who's the
Singletary.
Mike Singletary, Lawrence Taylor. I mean, they're just like jumping on you, trying to get you off that hill.
Coming around the tight end, like just you're blindsided.
Think how difficult it is, right? Just to stay on top of the mountain. Now, why is it difficult? Because things are changing so quickly.
Right.
So that places a lot of strain on revenue operations to constantly be looking at. I call them the steward of the buyer journey, right? Which is what's changing in every step of the buyer journey. Are there different stakeholders? Are there different personas in the buyer journey? Is the decision process changing? Are there new competitors that we have to adapt to? Is there specific messaging that's working better than others, right? I mean, we're constantly trying new things and adapting and always improving to just to stay on top of the mountain. So it's just as hard when you're on top than when you're trudging your way up to the top.
Yeah, I'd say it's even harder because sometimes you got to fight off two linebackers. You know what I mean? Like at the same time. So yeah, I know enough to know that there's no finish line there, and as soon as you think there's a finish line, you've actually lost, right? You've gotten removed and you don't even know it. So I love the idea that process that you're describing and what it is that you go through is really helping you create the roadmap for constantly innovating and constantly changing and constantly staying abreast of what's being said and how you can, come up with ideas and maybe even fail on those ideas if they don't work out, but at least you tried them. You know what I mean? Like you're never done. You're never finished. There's always more to do. And I think that's important to mention.
Well, yeah. And think how many companies, right? There's a graveyard of companies out there that fell off the mountain and this is why I think getting anchored on the buyer journey is so important, because when you have that outside in perspective and everything's being informed by the customer, right? You're always in touch with what's going on in the marketplace.
Right.
And going back, how many companies are in the graveyard because they lost touch with what's going on in the market or what their customers truly want. So that's the beauty of the model is if you're solely focused and you wake up every single day and what you care about is what is that buyer doing and what do they expect of me, then 9 times out of 10, it's going to be pretty hard to get kicked off the mountain. And here's the great thing about it, I'll be honest with you. There's not a ton of people that are, ton of companies that are really, this is still pretty early stage yet, revenue operations.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of the definitions I see on revenue operations, first of all, one I see on Google is driving more accountability for revenue growth. Now, the challenge I have with that definition, Renick, is revenue is by itself a lagging indicator. Right. So by the time you know whether you hit your revenue goal, it's too late to make any adjustments. Right. So you really got to get focused on what's that experience that the buyer has at every stage of the journey. And if you get uber focused on that, revenue is going to take care of itself.
Well,
but the idea is, customer facing teams, it's not a linear process. Like, it's not like, making a Model T off the assembly line, right? No. There's a lot, it's a very dynamic process. There's a lot coming at you and you got to manage a lot of that variability. But we're living in a time now with access to data where you can really narrow that bell curve of variability and drive a lot more predictability into the output, right? So if you say the whole idea of revenue operations is I want to minimize the variability of the inputs that I put in and the outputs that I can expect. Right. I'm trying to systematize this engine around revenue growth. Right.
I'm surprised now that more people haven't figured out Bill Belichick's system, right? Like, because either it's Tom Brady or he's got a system that's awesome. But you're right. You're systematizing, if that's even a word, your business to optimize it so that everybody's, next player step up and let's go to the Super Bowl.
And it's completely different than the way we used to think, right? Totally. The way we used to think was it's all about individual talent and I got to bring in the sales superstar, right? And I need sales heroes on the team because they're going to carry 80% of the load. And the problem with that is you end up with highly variable revenue output. And so you don't find out about it until 6-9 months down the road when you got to let them go and you got to start all over. And in the enterprise sales cycle, you got significant ramp up time. So the whole idea with revenue operations is how do I build the system and infrastructure so I can plug people in and make them productive as quickly as possible.
Not only productive, but inspired.
Inspired, which is, that is a great point, right? So what happens when you rely on sales heroes? And we've all seen this over and over again. They tend to get big egos within the organization. Right. And oftentimes they're not great cultural fits and they bring the whole culture down. Right. So if you're going to build a great high performing company, do you want to focus on the sales heroes who end up with big egos and end up clashing with everybody on the team and destroy the culture? Or do you want to build the system around and bring in great talent who's great for the culture and lift everybody up? To me, that's an easy decision.
No doubt. Well, I certainly know I could probably tell you with a fair amount of certainty that I've not experienced that. I personally haven't experienced what you're describing in the final stages where there's harmony and synergy and that, each silo is communicating in a way that is benefiting each other. There's no ego involved. I mean, how many times have you been at an organization where you're like, why doesn't marketing know what sales doing? And why are they not talking? And did you hear them fighting in the, the lunchroom? Like you just kind of.
At almost every stop along my career.
Right. Like, why isn't it that like people don't understand that? And well, I think the reality is that, not only is it hard, but it's something that takes time and you have to have buy-in, not only from the people who are interested in implementing, but belief that it's actually going to transpire. So, but there are examples out there. Apple comes to mind. Certainly Amazon comes to mind, where it's not by accident that they're trillion. Apple's a $2.4 trillion company. Like, huh? And they have a system that's working, right? They figured it out. I just think that we need to get out to the marketplace and start helping other organizations get the system that they need in place to do the same thing. Because I want to be connected with helping our organization get to $1 trillion.
Hey, this is a very exciting time, and I think this is like fighting for, was it Maslow's self-actualization, right, to the top of the hierarchy. I think there's very few companies that have made it there, but that doesn't mean you stop trying, because the reality is very small improvements across the buyer journey can lead to incredible returns for any business who starts to apply this, right? And we've actually ran the model on this. So if you take a $50 million enterprise software company and you make just 10% improvements in deal size, in opportunity qualification rate, and in win rate, just a 10% improvement, you'll improve the value of the company 82%.
Wow.
So this is string together a lot of stuff, and this is what systems thinking is all about, right? Is I need to string together a lot of small wins. Okay. Yeah. Everyone wants to talk about home run hitters, and the problem with home run hitters is there's a tremendous amount of variability. They're either hitting for the fences or they're striking out.
Right.
Well, when you got to meet the revenue projection quarter after quarter, striking out is really not a great strategy. Right.
Right.
So, and a lot of people don't have the patience for it, right? It really takes systems thinking to say, how am I going to put all the machinations of this engine together, right? And get really detailed and tactical on that. And then how do I bring it to my customer to really, again, expose that great experience and do it over and over and over again? So it's just like in Moneyball. If I can string together enough singles,
yep,
I'm getting around the bases, I'm scoring runs, and I'm going to the playoffs.
Listen, it's about changing hearts and minds. And I think, I certainly know what it's like to win a championship, and it certainly feels great. We all can look back on the hard work that we put together and all the things that we've done. And, look, it's an exhilarating feeling, right? But on the flip side of that coin, not winning the championship in the final game is absolutely gut-wrenching, and it gives you more time to think about what improvements you need to make, what you need to do. And so regardless of wins or losses, if you're looking at it from the perspective that this is going to help me in the long run, it doesn't feel like a failure. It feels more like a process. It feels more like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And not that I'm not supposed to fail, but sometimes that those things happen. They're just not, it's not the right time. And so if you can learn from that and actually optimize it in a way where it actually compels you into more of what you're talking about as far as synchronization, like, is that the right word? Did I say the right word?
Synchronization.
The better off you're going to be. So don't get down about failing. Not excited about it, but take what you learned and
get excited about it.
Excited.
Why not? But there's this incredible quote. I may have shared this with you in the past, but this goes back to being persistent, right? Having systems thinking and being persistent and trying every single day, right? Because I think a lot of us think, right, this is the home run hitters mentality. A lot of us think that it's one swing at the bat, right? That's going to make all the difference, right? We forget about all the effort and hard work that we have to put into it and all the learning that we do by trying a lot of different things and failing that ultimately gets us to the goal. So here's the quote by Jacob Riis. When nothing seems to help, I go and look at a stone cutter hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing him. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know it was not that blow that did it, but all that had come before.
Right. It's momentum.
Yeah.
And you're right. It takes a while to build up that momentum, but once you get it going, not only is it hard to stop, but you don't want it to stop. Right. Like, it's a good thing.